The restaurant was full that evening, filled with the smell of fresh food and the sound of people laughing. It was the kind of place where rich people came to show their style, to eat expensive meals and to feel important. Every table was busy. Waiters were rushing around and the lights made everything shine like gold. Into this world walked a man who did not look like the others. He was tall, broad, and wore a simple hoodie with sneakers. His face was calm, but there was strength in his eyes. Some people turned their heads, whispering softly. They thought they recognized him, but they were not sure. The man was Big Shaq, the famous rapper, though today he came without his usual luxury cars, shining chains, or bodyguards. He wanted peace. He wanted to see how people treated him when no one knew who he was. A waiter noticed him walking in. The waiter was young, proud, and always believed that rich clothes showed rich men. He saw Shaq's hoodie and sneakers and immediately judged him. With a half smile, the waiter blocked his way. "Sir," the waiter said loudly so that the nearby tables could hear, "I think you are in the wrong place. This is not a fast food shop. The cheapest item here costs more than your outfit." The customers at the next table laughed nervously. Some of them knew the man was Big Shaq, but they stayed silent, waiting to see what would happen. Others thought the waiter was right. Why would someone dressed so simply enter a restaurant that charged thousands for a single dish? Big Shaq stayed silent. He looked at the waiter with steady eyes, not angry, not smiling, just watching. His silence made the waiter uncomfortable, but he tried to act strong. "You see, sir," the waiter continued, his voice dripping with arrogance, "this restaurant is for important people, for successful people. Maybe you should try a small cafe down the street." A whisper spread in the air. Some people began recording the scene on their phones. The tension grew. Shaq still did not speak, but he slowly walked past the waiter and took a seat at a table near the center. His calmness was heavier than any words. The waiter followed, his pride hurt. He wanted to show his power, to make this man leave. "Sir, you cannot just sit here," he said, raising his voice again. "Do you even have the money to pay for water? Or will you try to leave without paying?" The insult was sharp, cutting through the room like a knife. Some customers gasped. A woman at the corner covered her mouth in shock. An old man shook his head, muttering, "This is going to end badly." Still, Big Shaq said nothing. He placed his hands on the table, his large fingers tapping slowly like the beat of a drum. His eyes were fixed on the waiter, but he spoke no word. The silence felt louder than a shout. The waiter laughed nervously. He believed the man was powerless. He believed he had won. He raised his chin higher, enjoying the attention of the room. But not everyone agreed. At another table, a young boy whispered to his father, "Dad, isn't that Big Shaq?" The father hushed him quickly, afraid to get involved. Another customer opened his phone and searched the face. Yes, it was him. But still, no one spoke out loud. Everyone was waiting. The manager of the restaurant, hearing the noise, rushed out from the back. His eyes immediately fell on the tall man at the table. The blood drained from his face. He knew exactly who had entered. Panic hit him. But before he could speak, Big Shaq slowly raised his hand. A simple gesture, but it stopped the manager in his tracks. Shaq's calm voice finally broke the silence. "Bring me water," he said, his words deep, steady, and heavy with power. The manager bowed his head and rushed to obey, but the waiter laughed again. "Water, only water? This is what you came for?" He sneered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I knew it. No money, no class, nothing. You should not be here." The room froze. Every eye was now on the table. Every ear waited for Shaq's next move. The waiter thought he had won, but in truth he had just stepped into the biggest mistake of his life. Big Shaq leaned back in his chair, his eyes dark but controlled. He let the insult hang in the air, stretching the silence longer and longer, building suspense so heavy that even the lights seemed dimmer. At that moment, nobody realized. They were watching the beginning of a story that would shake the entire restaurant, and the waiter's life would never be the same again. The restaurant was silent after the insult, but silence in such a place was never empty. It was full of whispers, gasps, and stolen glances. Every customer had their own thought, their own secret conversation, and yet all eyes stayed locked on the man in the hoodie. The waiter stood tall, arms crossed, enjoying the attention. He thought the silence meant victory, that the people were admiring his courage for putting a poor man in his place. He smiled, but his smile was shaky. Something about the man's calm eyes, something about his heavy silence, made the waiter's skin feel cold. Still, his pride told him he was right. At the far corner, two businessmen leaned toward each other. "That's him, isn't it?" one whispered. "Look carefully. That face, those eyes. It's Big Shaq," the other man frowned. "Are you sure? Why would Big Shaq come here in such clothes? Why would he let a waiter insult him?" "That's what makes me sure," the first replied. "He doesn't need to prove anything. He's testing the room." At another table, a young woman began recording on her phone. She kept her hands low, hidden under the tablecloth. But her camera lens pointed straight at the man in the hoodie. She whispered to her friend, "If this is really Big Shaq, the world has to see what happens next." The whispers grew like waves, spreading from table to table. Some people laughed nervously, others argued in low voices. Still, nobody stood up. Nobody dared to defend him. All were waiting for him to defend himself. The waiter noticed the stares and became even bolder. "See?" he said loudly. "The whole room agrees. You do not belong here. Why don't you leave before you embarrass yourself more?" But the crowd did not agree. They were divided. Half believed the waiter was right, half knew he was wrong. The tension grew heavy, pressing on everyone's chest. Shaq finally moved. He picked up the glass of water the manager had brought, lifted it slowly, and drank. His every motion was calm, deliberate, and powerful. The sound of the glass touching the table echoed through the room like thunder. The waiter flinched but covered it with another laugh. "Ah, yes, water. That's all you can afford." His words rang out, but this time fewer people laughed. Something about his arrogance was starting to feel wrong, even cruel. Near the door, a family of tourists sat frozen. Their daughter tugged on her mother's sleeve. "Mom," she whispered, "that's Big Shaq. I saw his video yesterday." The mother tried to hush her, but the little girl's voice carried further than expected. Several heads turned, their eyes widening. The recognition began to spread. One by one, more people realized the truth. They whispered his name under their breath, Big Shaq. Some gasped. Some covered their mouths. A few started typing quickly on their phones, sharing messages and photos. The waiter still did not see it. He only saw a hoodie, sneakers, and silence. His arrogance blinded him. He leaned forward, tapping his pen against his order pad, speaking louder. "Sir, I will ask again. Do you even have money for the bill? Or should we call security to help you leave?" The crowd's whispers grew sharper. A man muttered, "He's digging his own grave." A woman near the bar whispered, "He doesn't know who he's talking to." Another voice hissed, "Wait until the truth comes out." The tension had now turned into a storm. Everyone could feel it. The waiter was standing on thin ice, and it was about to crack. Big Shaq leaned forward at last. His deep voice cut through the whispers, calm yet heavy with authority. "Do you always speak to guests this way?" The waiter blinked, caught off guard. He had expected anger, shouting, maybe even threats. Instead, the question was simple, too simple. And it was the simplicity that made it dangerous. "Yes." The waiter lied quickly, trying to regain control. "We only serve real customers here, not—" "Imposters," gasps filled the air. People shook their heads, whispering faster now. "He's done for. That's Big Shaq, no doubt. Why is he not stopping? Does he want to lose his job?" The manager stood frozen near the kitchen, his face pale, sweat rolling down his forehead. He wanted to scream at the waiter, to drag him away, but Shaq's raised hand still held him back. The manager knew what was happening. He knew Shaq was testing the man, testing the entire restaurant, and he dared not interfere. Shaq leaned back again, resting his huge hands on the table. He tapped his fingers softly, like the beat of a hidden song. Each tap was a warning, though only a few could hear it. The whispers turned into silence again. The whole room held its breath. The waiter, blinded by pride, smiled once more. "See, sir, no answer. That means you agree you don't belong here." But deep inside, in the heart of that silence, everyone knew Shaq was only waiting, and when he decided to act, the truth would explode like thunder, and nothing in that restaurant would ever be the same. The sound of whispers had grown louder, like small waves crashing against rocks. The waiter, proud of himself, stood straighter, thinking he was the center of attention. But deep inside the crowd, faces were changing. Some looked nervous, some excited, and some filled with pity. Everyone knew the waiter had no idea of the storm waiting for him. From the kitchen doors, a man rushed out. His steps were quick, almost stumbling, his forehead shining with sweat. He was the restaurant's manager, a man who usually carried himself with confidence and control. But the moment his eyes fell on the tall figure sitting calmly in the middle of the room, His body froze. His lips parted slightly and his face went pale like paper. It was him. Big Shaq. The manager's heart pounded in his chest. He had seen the rapper only once before, during a secret meeting when Shaq had bought part of the restaurant chain. That day, Shaq had been in a suit surrounded by lawyers. Today, dressed simply, he looked like a man blending with the crowd. But those eyes, that calm face, and that presence, there was no mistaking it. The manager opened his mouth to speak, but before words could leave, Shaq lifted a hand. It was a small gesture, but heavy like an order. The manager stopped at once, his voice swallowed back. The silence in the room deepened. The waiter noticed the manager's strange behavior. Confused, he frowned. "Sir, why are you standing there like that? Throw this man out. He doesn't belong here." His voice was loud, sharp, filled with arrogance. The manager's jaw tightened. His heart screamed to shout at the waiter to stop his foolishness. But Shaq's hand was still raised. His calm eyes locked on him, silently saying, "Wait." The customers shifted nervously in their seats. Some were biting their lips, some holding their breath. They could see the manager's fear, the way his hand shook. They knew what the waiter still refused to see. Shaq leaned forward slightly. His deep voice rolled out slow and steady. "Sit down, manager." The command was simple, but the weight of it made the manager's knees weak. Without a word, he obeyed, pulling a chair near the kitchen door, lowering his head. The waiter's eyes widened. Never in his life had he seen his boss obey anyone like that. "What are you doing?" The waiter hissed. "Why are you listening to him? He's nobody." A ripple of gasps traveled across the room. Phones were out now, cameras recording every word, every movement. The internet would soon know everything. The waiter, blinded by pride, had no idea his humiliation was already spreading beyond these golden walls. Shaq finally looked at the waiter directly. The weight of that gaze was crushing yet calm. "Nobody?" he repeated, his voice quiet but cutting like a blade. The waiter shifted, his arrogance faltering for the first time. Yes, just a customer. A man who cannot afford to be here." The silence after his words was deadly. The manager covered his face with his hands, unable to watch the disaster unfold. Customers leaned forward in suspense, hearts racing. Everyone knew the waiter was stepping into a hole so deep he would never climb out. Shaq leaned back again, fingers tapping the table in a slow rhythm. "Interesting," he said softly. "So this is how you treat the people who walk into this place?" "Yes," the waiter answered too quickly, trying to stand tall. "Only those who deserve respect get respect here." Gasps filled the air. The young girl near the door whispered loudly to her mother, "Mom, he really doesn't know." "That's Big Shaq." The words carried across the room like fire, and more people nodded, whispering the name under their breath. The waiter heard the whispers now. His chest tightened. He glanced around and saw the phones, the faces, the tension. A thought flickered in his mind. Could it be true? Could this man in a hoodie be who they were saying? He shook the idea away. Impossible, he told himself. Big Shaq would never sit here like this. But the manager knew. The manager's silence, his bowed head, his trembling hands. They told the truth louder than words. The waiter tried to laugh, but his voice cracked. "Look at everyone," he said, waving his hand. "They're all staring at you. Do you feel important now?" Shaq's lips curved into the faintest smile, but it was not warm. It was the smile of a man who held power, of a man who could destroy with a single word. He did not need to raise his voice. His presence was enough. The room held its breath. The waiter's pride was breaking piece by piece, though he still didn't see the full picture. The crowd leaned forward, their eyes wide, waiting for the moment when the truth would finally crash down like thunder. And in that tense silence, one thought spread from table to table, like a secret shared in every ear. The waiter had just insulted the owner of the very ground he was standing on. The air in the restaurant grew heavy, as if the very walls could sense the storm about to break. Every eye was fixed on the man in the hoodie, every breath held tight. The waiter, though still standing tall, began to feel the weight of those stares. Something was wrong. Something was different about this man. Big Shaq sat in silence for a moment longer. His fingers tapped the table slowly, rhythm like a heartbeat. Then, without a word, he reached into his pocket. The sound of fabric moving was enough to make the crowd lean forward. Phones stayed raised, cameras flashing quietly. The waiter sneered, trying to hide his nervousness. "What now? Looking for coins to pay for your water?" His laugh echoed hollow in the tense air. But when Shaq's hand came out, it was not holding coins. It held a sleek black card, something rare, something almost legendary. The kind of card that only the wealthiest men in the world carried. Its surface glimmered faintly under the golden lights. Gasps filled the room. Several customers stood halfway out of their seats, eyes wide. A businessman near the bar whispered, "That's the founder's card. Only the owner of the chain has that." The manager, sitting with bowed head, closed his eyes. He knew this moment had come. He whispered under his breath, "Now he will know. Now everyone will know." The waiter stared at the card, his mouth suddenly dry. He had never seen one in real life. What is that?" he asked, his voice trembling despite his effort to sound strong. Shaq placed the card on the table with slow, deliberate movement. The sound of it hitting the surface was like a hammer striking stone. The restaurant fell completely silent. Even the kitchen noise seemed to fade. "This," Shaq said in his deep, steady voice, "is the key to this place." The words were calm, yet they shook the entire room. Some people clapped hands over their mouths. Others whispered furiously to each other. The truth was no longer a secret. The man in the hoodie was not just a customer. He was the owner. The waiter's face drained of color. He stepped back, stumbling slightly. No, that's impossible. You can't be." But before he could finish, one of the older customers, a man who had been silent all evening, stood up. "I was at the opening of this chain years ago. That card was shown then. Only the owner had it." He pointed directly at Shaq. "And it belongs to him." The whisper turned into a wave of voices, rising, growing, almost breaking into cheers. The name spread clearly now. Big Shaq, Big Shaq, Big Shaq. The waiter's knees weakened. His hands shook. His arrogance, once so tall, collapsed like glass. He realized too late that he had not just insulted a customer. He had insulted the man who owned the roof above his head, the ground beneath his feet, and the very job he held. Shaq leaned back in his chair, his eyes steady on the trembling waiter. "You see," he said, "I do not need to shout. I do not need to prove myself. The truth always reveals itself." The waiter opened his mouth, but no words came out. He wanted to apologize, to explain, to beg, but his pride fought with his fear, leaving him frozen. The crowd could not stop watching. Phones were recording every second. The internet would soon explode with the story of the waiter who mocked Big Shaq without knowing who he was. Shaq's voice filled the silence again. "I come here sometimes," he said slowly, "to see how my staff treat people. Not when cameras are flashing, not when red carpets are rolled out, but when they believe no one is watching. That is when a man's truth is revealed." His eyes locked on the waiter. "And your truth?" His ugliness, the waiter shook his head wildly. "No, sir, I didn't mean." "Didn't mean?" Shaq interrupted softly. "Every word you spoke, you meant. Every insult, every laugh, every look, you meant them. And now you will face them." The silence in the room grew sharp again. The waiter's breath came fast, shallow. His pride had vanished completely, replaced with fear. He realized he was not in control. He never had been. The manager, still seated, finally lifted his head. His eyes were filled with shame. He whispered, "Forgive us, sir. We failed," but Shaq did not answer him. His attention stayed fixed on the waiter like a hunter watching his prey. The crowd leaned forward, the suspense unbearable. They knew the truth had been revealed, but what would Shaq do next? Fire the waiter on the spot? Humiliate him in front of everyone? Or something even greater? Shaq's fingers tapped the black card once more, the sound echoing like a countdown. He let the silence stretch, let the tension burn hotter. Then he leaned forward, his deep voice dropping low, almost like thunder before the storm. "You insulted me tonight," he said. "But worse, you insulted every guest who ever walked into this place, and I will not let that go unanswered." The waiter's heart dropped. His legs felt weak. The crowd held their breath, waiting for the judgment that was about to fall. The room held its breath. The black card still rested on the table like a crown, glowing under the golden lights. The waiter stared at it as if it were a snake, his body frozen, his mouth half open but empty of words. The crowd pressed forward in their seats, their phones raised higher, their whispers growing into a low rumble. Everyone knew this was the turning point. Big Shaq leaned forward slowly, his large hands resting on the table. His calm voice carried across the room, heavy but steady. "You all want to know the truth," he said. So I will give it to you. The waiter's heart hammered in his chest. He wanted to disappear, to melt into the floor, but his legs refused to move. He had mocked this man, insulted him, treated him like dirt. And now this man was about to reveal who he really was. Shaq's eyes swept the room. Years ago, he began, I walked into a restaurant very much like this one. I was younger then, dressed simply, no chains, no bodyguards. The staff laughed at me. They thought I didn't belong. That night I walked out, but I made myself a promise. One day I would own a place like this. And when I did, I would make sure no guest was ever judged by their clothes. The crowd gasped softly. Some nodded, some lowered their eyes, ashamed. Shaq tapped the black card with one finger. That promise led me here. I bought this chain quietly. No press, no headlines, no flashing lights. I wanted to see the truth of people when they thought no one important was watching. His voice grew sharper. And tonight I saw the truth in you. His gaze locked on the waiter. The waiter's lips trembled. I didn't mean... Shaq raised a hand, silencing him instantly. You meant every word. You believed you were powerful because of the uniform you wear. You believed you could crush another man with insults because you thought he had less than you. But respect is not measured in clothes or coins. Respect is the duty of every human to another. The crowd broke into murmurs. Some clapped softly, unable to hold back. The young girl near the door whispered loudly, "He's a hero." Her mother tried to hush her, but her words carried through the tense silence. Shaq turned to the customers. His voice rose, steady and strong. To every one of you sitting here tonight, I owe you an apology. This is my house. My responsibility. And tonight this house failed you. The manager lowered his head in shame. The staff near the kitchen looked pale, their eyes wide. But, Shaq continued, this failure is not yours. It belongs to those who forgot what service means. It belongs to those who thought power came from mocking instead of kindness. The applause started softly from one table, then another. Soon the entire room clapped, their faces lit with respect. The waiter stood frozen in the middle of the storm. His pride shattered. His mind spun with fear. Every clap felt like a nail in his coffin. He wanted to run, but his feet would not move. Shaq's eyes returned to him. The room went quiet again. And you, Shaq said, his voice dropping low, heavy as thunder, will carry this night with you forever. You thought I was nobody, but tonight you learned who I am. The waiter's voice cracked, weak and broken. Please, sir. Forgive me. I didn't know. Shaq leaned forward, his presence filling the space between them. That is the point. You didn't know. You judged without knowing. You insulted without reason. And that is the greatest mistake of all. The words cut deeper than any punishment. The waiter's shoulders sank. His arrogance had vanished completely, replaced by shame. The customers looked at him with disgust. One man shook his head. Arrogance always falls. Another woman whispered, This is justice. Shaq lifted the black card again, holding it between his fingers. The golden light reflected off its surface. This card means ownership, but tonight it means something more. It means truth. And the truth is simple. Respect must be given, no matter who walks through these doors. The crowd erupted again in applause, this time louder, stronger, echoing through the restaurant like thunder. The waiter covered his face with his hands, trembling. His pride was gone. His fear was all that remained. Shaq stood slowly, towering above everyone, his presence larger than life. His calm eyes scanned the room one last time before returning to the broken waiter. This is not the end, Shaq said softly, almost like a warning. Your test is only beginning. The words left the waiter trembling harder, his mind racing with what those words meant. What test, what fate awaited him? The customers leaned closer, eager, hungry for what would happen next. The night was not over. The revelation was only the beginning. The clapping slowed, fading back into silence. The golden lights above flickered slightly, casting shadows across the restaurant. All eyes stayed locked on Big Shaq. He stood tall in the center, his black card still in hand, his face calm but unreadable. The room waited, breathless, to see what he would do. The waiter's knees trembled. His uniform, once a sign of pride, now felt like a chain around his neck. He swallowed hard, his throat dry. Please, sir, he whispered. I didn't know. I never meant to. Shaq's deep voice cut across him like a blade. You didn't know because you didn't care. You never asked. You never respected. You only judged. The words echoed like thunder in the silence. The waiter lowered his head, ashamed. Shaq stepped forward, closing the distance between them. His shadow fell over the trembling man, larger and heavier than anything he had ever felt. You thought power was in mocking the weak. Tonight I will show you what true power is. The crowd leaned forward, their hearts pounding. Phones stayed raised. Everyone knew they were witnessing history. Shaq turned slightly, addressing the entire room. I could end his career right now, he said, his voice calm, steady. I could fire him, humiliate him, and throw him out on the street. That would be easy. The waiter flinched. His eyes widened with fear. He expected the worst, but, Shaq continued, his voice growing sharper, easy is not always right. Tonight his punishment will not be silence or dismissal. Tonight he will learn what respect means. The waiter blinked in confusion. His body shook. What do you mean? Shaq's eyes locked on him. You will serve every guest here tonight. With respect. With humility. With the care you should have shown from the start. And if even one person is left unhappy, tomorrow you will walk out of this place for good. The crowd gasped. Some clapped immediately, others whispered in awe. It was not the punishment they expected. It was heavier. It was public. It was a test. The waiter's face paled. His pride screamed at him to refuse, but his fear forced him to obey. He bowed his head. Oh, yes, sir. Shaq stepped back, his deep voice steady. Begin. The room stirred with excitement. Customers sat taller in their chairs, their eyes gleaming. They were now part of the punishment. Each dish, each glass, each word would test the waiter, and every eye would watch. The waiter picked up a tray with shaking hands. He moved to the first table, placing water glasses carefully, his voice low. Here you go, sir. Thank you for waiting. The customer raised an eyebrow but nodded slowly. Better. He said softly, loud enough for the waiter to hear. The waiter moved to the next table, his pride crumbling more with every step. Ma'am, your order will be ready soon. I apologize for the delay. His words were awkward, forced, but at least they were polite. The crowd whispered among themselves. Some smiled at the justice they were watching. Others shook their heads, pitying the man who had dug his own grave. Shaq returned to his seat, his calm eyes following the waiter's every move. He did not need to speak. His silence carried more power than 100 words. The waiter worked table after table, sweat dripping down his face, his hands trembling. Each time he spoke, his arrogance fell away a little more. He bowed his head. He apologized. He served like he had never served before. The customers responded differently. Some tested him with sharp words, others stayed quiet, letting his shame burn deeper. One woman asked for extra napkins just to see if he would obey politely. He did. Another man asked for a refill 3 times. The waiter never complained. The punishment was working. His pride was breaking. His arrogance was gone. Near the kitchen, the other staff watched in silence. Some felt pity, others felt relief. They had seen his arrogance every day, but tonight they saw it crumble under the weight of truth. Shaq finally spoke again, his voice carrying across the room. Respect is not a choice. It is a duty. It does not depend on clothes or money or fame. It is given to every guest every time. If you cannot understand that, you do not belong here. The waiter's hands shook harder. He turned, bowing his head toward Shaq. I understand, sir. I swear I understand. The room grew silent once more. Everyone knew this was not the end. The night was not finished. The test was still unfolding. Shaq leaned back, his voice dropping low. We will see. The crowd felt a shiver. They realized that this was not just a punishment. It was a lesson for everyone. A lesson that would echo beyond these golden walls, and as the waiter stumbled toward the next table, every camera stayed focused. Every eye stayed locked. The night was far from over. The night moved forward, but it did not feel like a normal night at the restaurant. Something had changed in the air. The golden light still shone, the silverware still glimmered, and the smell of food still floated through the hall, but everyone's focus stayed locked on one man and one waiter. The waiter's once proud shoulders were now bent. His hands shook each time he lifted a tray. Sweat rolled down his forehead. Every step felt heavier than the last. He bowed to each customer, his voice small, his words careful. The arrogance that had filled him earlier had completely vanished. Big Shaq sat silently at his table, watching. He did not need to move. His presence was enough. His eyes followed the waiter with calm intensity, like a teacher watching a student during a final test. The customers, too, were part of the lesson. Some tested the waiter with small requests. Others stayed quiet, observing. A young boy asked for an extra plate of fries, though it wasn't on the menu. The waiter, instead of scoffing, hurried to the kitchen, asking the chef politely. When he returned, he placed the fries on the table with a bow. "I hope this is good for you, sir," he said softly. The boy's smile was wide, and his father nodded with approval. "Much better," the father said. The waiter's cheeks flushed red, but he said nothing. Another guest asked for sparkling water 3 times in a row. Each time the waiter rushed to refill the glass without complaint. His pride was gone. His only goal was to pass this impossible test. The crowd whispered among themselves. Some smiled at the irony. Others felt pity. One woman leaned toward her friend and whispered, "He used to treat everyone like this, mocking, arrogant. Maybe tonight will change him forever." The waiter could feel the stares. Every mistake, every delay, every word was being judged. He wanted to cry, but he forced himself to keep moving. He realized now that this was more than punishment. It was a mirror showing him the truth of who he had become. Finally, after serving every table, the waiter returned to Shaq's side. His hands were empty. His knees bent slightly as he bowed. His voice cracked as he spoke. "Sir, I did what you asked. I served everyone with respect. Please, I beg you, forgive me." The restaurant grew silent. Not a single spoon clinked. All eyes were on Shaq. Shaq leaned forward, his deep voice steady but heavy with meaning. "Tell me," he said, "what did you learn tonight?" The waiter's lips trembled. His throat felt dry, but he forced himself to answer. "I learned, respect is not about clothes. It is not about money. It is not about power. Every person deserves respect, no matter how they look, no matter where they come from." Shaq's eyes stayed locked on him. The waiter's body shook under the weight of that gaze. "And why?" Shaq asked slowly. "Did it take tonight for you to understand that?" Tears welled in the waiter's eyes. Because I was blind with pride. I thought respect was something you give only to the rich. I thought mocking others made me strong, but I see now. It only made me small." The crowd stirred. Some nodded, some whispered words of agreement. A few clapped softly. Shaq's face remained unreadable. Then, after a long silence, he leaned back. "You are right," he said. "Respect is not earned by wealth. It is given freely. And tonight you finally learned that lesson." The waiter's breath shook. For a moment he thought he was forgiven, but Shaq's voice grew sharper. "Understand this," Shaq continued. "You will keep your job tonight. Not because you deserve it, but because I want you to carry this shame. Every time you serve a guest, you will remember this night. Every time you put down a glass, you will hear the echo of your own insults. And every time you look at me, you will know you once mocked the man who owned this place." The waiter's tears fell. He bowed deeply, his pride completely broken. "Yes, sir," he whispered. "I will remember, always." The customers erupted in applause louder than before. Some stood to their feet, clapping, cheering, their voices filling the hall. They were not only clapping for Shaq, they were clapping for the lesson, for the justice they had seen with their own eyes. Shaq stood slowly, towering above everyone. His calm eyes swept across the room. "Let this be a reminder," he said. "Never judge a man by his clothes. Never mock someone you do not know, because you may be insulting the very hand that feeds you." The words thundered through the room, burning into every heart. With that, Shaq placed the black card back in his pocket. He walked toward the door, his steps heavy, steady, filled with power. The crowd parted for him like waves splitting for a ship. The waiter stayed behind, his head bowed, his face wet with tears. The sound of clapping still rang in his ears, but it was not for him. It was for the man who had taught him the hardest lesson of his life. As Shaq disappeared into the night, the crowd whispered the same thought again and again. Respect everyone, because you never know who truly stands before you. The applause faded into silence once Big Shaq walked out of the golden doors, leaving the restaurant heavy with his words. But though he had gone, his presence remained like thunder still echoing long after a storm has passed. The waiter stood frozen, his head bowed, his face pale. His hands still shook, not from carrying trays now, but from the weight of his shame. He felt the eyes of the customers burning into his back, some filled with pity, others with disgust. His chest rose and fell quickly as though he had run miles, but it wasn't running that exhausted him. It was the truth. The manager slowly walked forward, his steps heavy. He stopped in front of the trembling waiter, his face stern but sad. "Do you understand now?" he asked softly, though the whole room could hear. The waiter nodded quickly, tears gathering again. Yes, I understand. I was wrong. I was blind," the manager sighed deeply. "You didn't just insult a man. You insulted this house. And you insulted yourself." The words cut deeper than any blade. The waiter felt as if the floor might swallow him. Around them, the customers began to leave, but their whispers stayed behind. "That was incredible," one man said. "I'll never forget this night." Another woman murmured, "I came here for dinner, but I walked away with a lesson." Some smiled, others shook their heads. But every single one carried Big Shaq's words out into the world. Soon the restaurant was quieter. The chairs were empty, the tables half cleared. Only a few staff members lingered, whispering to each other. The waiter stood by himself, staring at the floor, too ashamed to meet anyone's eyes. The manager finally spoke again. "You should be thankful." The waiter looked up, confused. "Thankful?" "Yes," the manager said. "He could have destroyed you tonight. He could have taken away everything. Instead, he gave you a chance to change, a chance most men never get." The waiter's lips trembled. He thought about how close he had been to losing everything. His job, his reputation, even his dignity. He realized that Big Shaq had not punished him out of cruelty. He had punished him out of mercy. The staff began cleaning, but even their usual chatter was quiet. Every movement felt heavy, filled with the memory of what they had witnessed. The kitchen, once full of clanging pans and laughter, was silent. Everyone was thinking about the same thing: respect. As the waiter slowly helped clear the tables, he remembered each insult he had thrown at Shaq. Each word felt like poison now. He replayed them in his mind, wishing he could take them back, but knowing he never could. His pride had been shattered in front of the entire world. But maybe, just maybe, from those broken pieces something new could grow. Later that night, when the last customer had left and the staff began to close, the waiter stood alone by the mirror near the entrance. He looked at his reflection. His uniform was wrinkled, his face pale, his eyes red. For the first time, he didn't see a proud man. He saw a fool who had been given a second chance. The manager placed a hand on his shoulder. "Go home," he said quietly. "Rest, tomorrow you begin again. And this time you will serve not with pride, but with humility." The waiter nodded, his throat tight. "I will. I swear I will." When he walked out into the night, the city lights looked different. The air felt heavier yet freer. Every passerby he saw on the street, every stranger he looked at differently. He no longer saw clothes or style. He saw human beings, people who deserved respect no matter what. Meanwhile, across town, Big Shaq sat in the back of a quiet car looking out at the city lights. His bodyguard in the front seat glanced at him through the mirror. "Boss, why didn't you fire him?" "You had every reason." Shaq's deep voice was calm. "Because firing him would only break his body. I wanted to break his pride. That way, maybe he'll rebuild himself better." The bodyguard nodded slowly. "You think he will?" Shaq's eyes stayed fixed on the glowing streets. "That's up to him. I gave him the lesson. What he does with it is his story now." Back at the restaurant, the waiter stopped for a moment outside the door. He looked up at the glowing sign above the entrance, the name of the chain shining proudly in the night. He whispered to himself, "I'll never forget, never again." The street was quiet. The city moved on, but inside one man's heart, a storm had settled into calm. A lesson had been burned deep, one that would guide him for the rest of his life. And though the night had ended, the story of what happened in that golden restaurant would travel far, told and retold until it became more than just a memory. It became a warning, a reminder, a legend. Never judge a stranger, never mock the unknown, because behind the simplest face there may be a king.